Showtime 112 is a Trustmaster ambassador. Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. When the British mandate in the Palestine Protectorate ended in May 1948, the State of Israel was declared, and the First Arab-Israeli War began. But the British didn't leave the entire region. They still maintained military presence in countries such as Egypt and Jordan. They didn't ignore their former protectorate either, often sending reconnaissance flights over it. One such recon flight was intercepted by the Israeli Air Force on 20 November 1948. Israeli P-51 Mustang, flown by Wayne Peake, an American volunteer and a World War II veteran, shot down an RAF Mosquito. You can learn more about this incident in our earlier video. This wasn't the last incident between the Israeli Air Force and the RAF. On 7 January 1949, an Israeli military column was attacked by Egyptian Air Force Spitfires in Sinai Desert. An RAF flight of 4 Spitfires was patrolling the area, and they decided to investigate. They were mistaken for Egyptians by the Israeli ground forces and by 2 Israeli Spitfires who rushed to protect their troops. The incident resulted in all 4 British Spitfires being shot down. We covered that story as well in an earlier video, and I recommend you watch it if you missed it. The incident occurred just hours before the ceasefire agreed to begin at 2 p.m. Israelis knew that Egyptian activity would probably cease, but they were less certain about the British. They have always considered them to be heavily biased towards the Arab side, and now that Israel shot down 4 British fighters, a retribution was likely. At first, the British didn't know what had happened to 4 of their fighters which failed to return to base. The 208 Squadron decided to launch a search mission, and they requested escort from the co-located Tempest Squadrons, numbers 213 and 6. Tempest pilots had just returned from earlier sorties, but they nevertheless rounded up, and the aircraft were hurriedly prepared. 4 Spitfire FR-18s led by Squadron Leader Morgan took off around 3 p.m. They flew at 500 feet, followed by 7 Tempest F-6s of number 213 Squadron, led by Group Captain Alan Anderson as medium cover at 6,000 feet. Finally, 8 Tempests from number 6 Squadron, led by Squadron Leader Dennis Crowley Milling, provided top cover at 10,000 feet. The British formation headed towards Rafah. In the headquarters of the Israeli 101st Fighter Squadron, Ezer Weizman, one of only 2 native Israeli fighter pilots at the time, contacted the Israeli Air Force Director of Operations. Weizman suggested that a 4-ship flight should be sent to fly over Rafah in order to boost the morale and pressure the Egyptians into respecting the ceasefire. The real reason was, of course, the expected British reaction to the earlier incident. The suggestion was approved. Weizman led the flight, which took off from Hatzor just after 3 p.m. Weizman was the nephew of the first president of Israel and the future president himself. He served with the RAF during World War II, but only qualified for flying in the late stages of the war. Weizman's wingman was Sandy Jacobs, another ex-RAF pilot with World War II experience. Jacobs was born in Palestine to British parents, and he was the youngest member of the squadron. Number 3 was Cesar Danny Dangot, and his wingman was Bill Schrader. Both of them were ex-US Navy pilots with World War II experience, and Schrader was flying his first operational mission with the squadron. The Israeli and the British formations were now heading towards each other. Weizman spotted black specks approaching from the south. He waggled his wings to signal his flight into a closer formation, increased his power, and started a climb. At this moment, the identity of the formation approaching them wasn't yet certain. The Israeli formation identified the low flight as Spitfires, and they seemed to be carrying bombs. As Weizmann estimated the British flight was entering Israeli airspace, he led his own flight into the attack. 4 Israeli Spitfires dove on the middle Tempest flight. The Tempest middle flight leader, Group Captain Anderson, spotted the 4 Israeli aircraft diving to attack his formation and ordered a brake to starboard. Israeli number 4 pilot, Bill Schrader, focused on the trailing Tempest flown by pilot officer David Crossley Tattersfield, a young, inexperienced pilot who had only joined the unit a couple of weeks earlier. Schrader fired accurately and the Tempest rolled into a vertical dive, eventually crashing on the desert floor. Tattersfield probably didn't even see Schrader and just focused on staying in formation. The middle Tempest section attempted to engage the Israeli Spitfires, but soon realized their guns wouldn't fire. Apparently, the ground crew of No. 2 13th Squadron had forgotten to cock the guns, as the airplanes were hurriedly prepared, soon after returning from the previous mission. The high Tempest flight, led by squadron leader Crowley Milling, joined the fight. Their guns worked, but they faced another problem. They couldn't jettison their external fuel tanks. This was another ground crew mistake, as they had over-tightened cradle arms to ensure that the tanks would be held firmly in place. This, however, prevented them from being jettisoned. A general melee developed with formations breaking up and most of the pilots fighting individually. Flight Lieutenant Brian Sprague of No. 6 Squadron recalled later that his section left him on his own, and the next minute there was an Israeli aircraft on his tail. The 4 British Spitfires also joined the fight, contributing to the general confusion. Although they were not the same models as those flown by the Israelis, that didn't stop Tempest pilots from trying to engage any Spitfire they could see. A radio call to waggle their wings allowed British Spitfires to be distinguished. Ezra Weizmann managed to get on the tail of a Tempest. He opened fire and achieved hits, but the Tempest kept flying. Soon, he realized there was another Tempest on his tail. Weizmann managed to outrun the British fighter, although his Spitfire was hit. The chaotic battle ended abruptly. Weizmann's dogfight brought him to low altitude, and he couldn't see any of his fellow pilots. He returned to Hatzor and found all 3 there. As Israeli pilots retreated, the RAF pilots were not allowed to follow them, so they turned back and the battle was over. The earlier incident could be explained as a clear mistake, but this time it was pretty obvious that the Israeli opponents were British fighters. Many on the Israeli side now expected heavy bomber raids on their airfields, and fighter pilots sat strapped in their cockpits since dawn. Local British commanders indeed asked for a permission to launch airstrikes, but the permission was never given. Instead, the British limited their action to diplomacy and warnings. They also insisted that the RAF flight had never crossed into Israeli airspace, and that they were conducting unarmed reconnaissance. The airplanes were clearly not unarmed, as is obvious from various reports, but the exact location remains contested. Israeli side claimed that the Tempest shot down by Bill Schrader had fallen 4 miles inside Israeli territory. The British deny that, and there is no conclusive evidence to support any of the claims. The First Arab-Israeli War was over. During the conflict, even though the British attempted to remain neutral, RAF airplanes were attacked by both sides on 4 occasions. Being in the middle of someone else's war tends to lead to such an outcome. Group Captain Anderson, who led one of the Tempest formations, later expressed his opinion of the British involvement with these words. This fantastically misplanned operation afforded a lively illustration of how an unbeaten Air Force appears able, at the drop of a hat, to disregard every lesson learned in 5.5 years of victorious total war. It was remarkable that only 1 aircraft was lost, considering that we were sent off unarmed to meet aircraft of greater maneuverability in a highly confused area of operations. Thank you for your time and keep watching Showtime 112.